Hi, everyone, and welcome back to episode 1 of Experimenting with Existence, a series where I take a closer look at some of my interests that aren't philosophy related, although they end up being related to philosophy oftentimes, as it turns out. Anyway, in this particular episode, episode 1, we're taking a closer look at strategy board games, which I've been very consumed with over the last decade and a half. And in this particular part 6, we're going to discuss one of my experiences very early on in my strategy board game career, if you will. It took place back in 2010. We're going to talk about when I entered American Numismatists, my 13th game that I created, when I entered that game into the 2010 Rio Grande Games Design Contest up in Milwaukee. So again, this is part 6 of episode 1, and in this part, we're going to talk about that contest and what it was like for me to enter my game. So this particular video, detailing part 6, is going to be split up into 4 sections. In the first section, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the contest itself, what it entailed, how it came about, or how at least I ended up entering the contest. And then in the second section, I'm going to talk about the day of the contest and what that was actually like, what some of the most memorable experiences were that I had, at least. So I'll get into that. And then in the third section, I'll talk about what came about as a result of the contest. Did I actually end up winning? The winner of the contest, I should have mentioned this from the outset, would have their game published by Rio Grande Games, arguably, one of the most premier or most popular publishers in the strategy board game industry. So, there was a lot at stake, if you will. So what ended up happening? What were the results? Not only, what were the results of the contest, but what were some of my more general takeaways from the whole experience itself? So I'll talk about those and elaborate on those in this third section of the video. And then I'll wrap up by, much like I did in part 5 of this episode, where I discussed in much more detail some of my more polished and publishable games, right? We took a closer look at the components, the boards, and the rules and how the games worked. Well, we're going to do the same thing with this game, right? The game I ended up entering into the contest. So I think, as I mentioned in that part 5, I'm going to talk about all my most, publishable games except for American Numismatists, because we'll get into that in more detail in part 6. So that's what we're going to do to conclude part 6 here, is to get into this game in more detail. You get a closer look at the components. This is actually one of the older boards, so I'll talk about sort of the evolution of the game over the years in terms of the components and so on. So this is one of the, actually this is probably like version 4. I ended up giving away a lot of versions of the game, including some of the boards I made. And over time, what ended up happening with the game was that I started minimizing it. Again, I've talked about this in previous videos, but I sort of acquired more of a publisher's mentality when I created these games over the years. And so the upshot of that was, again, some of my more original games, like the first ones I designed, they ended up getting sort of more refined versions over the years. So this is one of the older versions, but then again, over the years it got refined and refined and refined to the point where I got it down into a little, this is a large sandwich Ziploc bag, a gallon size, I think. So imagine you're a publisher, right? You could get this all into a very small box. So I think it's just interesting to point that out. We talked about that in prior videos, but it's happened with this game as well. But we'll take a closer look again to wrap up this part 6. We'll wrap up by taking a closer look at American Numismatists, the components of the game and how the game works, etc. As well as, one of the things I should mention is, over the years I also developed then a sort of, what would be the right word, a retheming. I rethemed the American Numismatist and turned it into, had a card collecting version of the game as well, which personally, so my dad, the whole impetus for this game was, my dad is American coins. He started with American coins. He's in subsequent years, it's turned more international in scope, but he was, as far back as when I was a kid, his job was buying and selling rare American coins for a profit. And so part of that would entail going to various coin shows where he would set up tables and sell his coins and so on. And so that was, again, the source, or the major influence for the creation of this game itself. And I would go to these shows and so on and see sort of how that whole process worked. But the whole point here, why I was bringing it up here, is that I would always like the sports cards more, and I was never that enamored with the coins. And so, not surprisingly, after I designed the original coin version, it didn't take too long, and I designed then a card collecting version where a lot of the same mechanics are involved. For the most part, it's the same sort of game, except in lieu of different denominations of coins, you had different sports, right? Hockey, the four major ones: hockey, basketball, baseball, and football. And you still, but the basic premise, if you will, of the game, the basic mechanics all remain the same. I did add in a few twists, which when we take a deeper dive into the games and show you on the table, I'll get into those, the nuanced differences maybe in that. But in general, just wanted to point out here at the outset that there was this card collecting sort of spin-off that emerged over the years as well. So that's the game plan here for this part 6. Let's go ahead and start then, as I mentioned, by talking about the contest itself, this 2010 Rio Grande Games Design Contest. What was it? How was it that I ended up entering the contest? And let me say from the outset here that it's going on almost 15 years here, a decade and a half since this took place. So I'm going on my memory alone. I haven't really talked to anyone else about the experience in preparation for this video. I'm just going off my terrible memory. So just wanted to put that out there here at the outset. And so one of the related points then is I don't actually remember how it was specifically that I came to learn about the contest 13 years ago and ended up, entering the contest. I can say at this point that it does seem unique. I'm not as involved in the board gaming hobby as I used to be at that time, just because I have more commitments to my kids. They're have more activities and so on. But to my knowledge, there aren't really contests like this around, or at least in my experience, this one, where the winner of the contest will have their game published by the publisher sort of running the contest. That's unique, at least in my experience. I haven't really ever heard of any other contest like that, and I think it's probably more and more unique over the years. So I think that's noteworthy, and I wanted to point that out. But in terms of how it was that I came to actually learning about it back, 13 years ago, I don't remember specifically. I do remember that it entailed, there were a few steps to enter the game. You had to kind of describe it, kind of label it, what was the sort of general theme, and, like these labels in terms of mechanics, what major mechanics were involved. So, but it wasn't that tedious of a application, if you will, in terms of submitting your game, getting your game submitted. But it did take, a little bit of time, and there was a process involved. I do remember that. I want to say at the outset, so there was some planning involved, and back then I only had, 2 kids, very young. So kudos to my wife for agreeing to this. We only had 2 at the time. So there was some, sort of commitment on her end. Okay, go ahead and do this. And there was a buddy of mine who played an integral sort of role in all of this. And so I want to give a shout out to him. I'll mention him periodically for the remainder of the video as well. But Dan Davis, he was is a good buddy of mine, and he again agreed to join me in this journey up to Milwaukee. And he really not only agreed to do all this in terms of going, but I remember him very enthusiastically playing and explaining the game during the contest itself, or during the competition, the day of the competition. So before I forget, I wanted to mention Dan and give a shout out to him and a thank you for not only agreeing to do all of that, but to do so enthusiastically. You certainly didn't have to do it with the degree of enthusiasm that you did. So thanks to Dan, he agreed to go up there. So if my memory serves me correctly, it was just I want to say the day before the contest, we basically drove all the way up there and then stayed at a motel. And so then the next day, the day of the contest, then very early on, again, I don't remember the specific details, but I want to say it started very early and then ran all day and through the night. So it was an all-day sort of thing. And I guess we'll go ahead and that'll get into section 2 here of the video. I'll talk about the day itself, the event itself, and what that was like. So we wake up the morning of and just immediately head to the contest. So I should have mentioned this from the get-go, but Jamey Phillip is his name. I'll probably link his Board Game Geek user profile in the description or the notes for this video. But he was a major player in all of this. he sort of ran. Let me back up. I believe he was the founder, and he still sort of runs the show for the Milcog board gaming group up in Milwaukee. It's the largest gaming group in the metro Milwaukee area. And they were kind of running the show, so to speak, for this contest. Now, it was, how would you say? I mean, really, Rio Grande Games was the company or the publisher that was going to be publishing the game. But then Jamey, Phillip, and this Milcog were the ones sort of running the actual show and the actual competition. So I think it was through him that you would actually submit your application or your entry, and then he answered the questions, and there was back and forth with him in terms of getting ready for the competition. And then for the contest itself, it was actually held in his garage, his residential garage. So I wasn't sure what to really make of that. Dan and I really have no idea what to expect here. I have only been designing and playing these strategy board games for 2 years at this point, not even probably 2 years. I don't remember at what point during 2010 this contest actually took place, but remember again, I only started really playing strategy board games in summer of 2008, playing, and hence then also I started designing them in the summer of 2008. So I hadn't been at this very long. I don't know, how my game is going to measure up. There's a lot of questions in the back of my mind going into this, and then on top of all that, it's happening, I know, in a garage of somebody's house. So I wasn't sure really what to expect of that. It felt like maybe going into it, like, is this going to actually be an official sort of contest? How official can it be being in some dude's garage? But as it turns out, he has an awesome, big, huge garage completely devoted to gaming. I think he actually calls it the gaming garage. This is a massive garage. And so we arrived there, walk up, don't know anyone, including Jamey. I had been in correspondence with him, but had never actually met this guy, Jamey Phillip. And just want to mention again how awesome he turned out. Thank you to Jamey all these years later. I've thanked him profusely, after the contest as well. But for running all this, he turned out to be an amazing guy. All the people I ended up meeting, and I'll talk about this more later, but they ended up being awesome. It was such a great experience. But anyway, so we walk up though to Jamey's place, and we don't really, we don't know what to expect. Again, going to some dude's garage, and I even remember it kind of being the neighborhood itself with lots of twisty, windy roads with seemingly like pretty small residences. So like how big can this garage be? Is this going to be legit and so on? But we end up finding it, park, walk up, and this is a massive garage that everybody's in. So not by everybody, I mean, let's say 10 contestants with their games, and you're setting them up. You have your own spots. So I want to mention that. From my recollection, there was, let's say, 10 to a dozen games set up in that garage, and with plenty of space. So that gives you an idea how big the garage was. Because you've seen, how much space some of these games take, and how much you'll see in more detail here how much my game takes. Although that's one of the things I pride myself on over the years, right? As it takes up less and less space. You become more and more refined in your sort of design process, right? Where you think more and more like a publisher, it takes up less and less space. But anyway, the point here is there's probably 10 to a dozen of these games set up, including mine, in this garage. And so, but there were even more entrants. So I was trying to think exactly. I want to say maybe 15 to 18 total games entered into the contest, and then like 10. So let's say about 2/3 of them were actually set up. So, I don't know how. One of the things I remember reflecting a lot on during the day of the contest itself was like, how exactly, is this going to work? How do they judge the games and so on? Especially in view of what I was mentioning here is that like 1/3 of the games that were in the contest, they weren't set up. The person that created the game wasn't there and so on. So I wasn't really sure how that part of the whole process was going to work. From what I recall, all the judges played as many of the games as they could, including, some of the ones that weren't actually there. So the judges were able to play these other games, but I only remember, say, 2/3 of the games that were entered into the contest actually being set up in the garage. But anyway, so walk up, not sure what to expect. Ends up being this massive gaming garage, which was pretty cool sort of environment. It's big enough to include all the games, all the people, plenty of space, but yet not so big as to be like, to feel small and sort of to be kind of intimidating. And it still had it in a kind of intimate feel, like you still could hear each other easily and see everybody that was there and so on. So again, Jamey Phillip was the name of the guy that hosted the contest. Big shout out to him as well. He ended up being super cool. Had at that point the largest gaming collection. He showed me his collection later on during the day, and it was entailed in part this huge closet that was just completely full of games. I think I read somewhere preparing for this video that he has over 2,000 games at this point. But anyway, so very interesting guy, and kudos to him for setting all this up. He still runs the Milcog gaming group, to my knowledge, and welcomed us all in, and it was a very, I guess that's one thing I want to make sure, I've already suggested this, but I want to make sure that I really hammer home is just how welcoming it was. So walking up there, we really don't, again, Dan and I don't know what to expect, but from the moment we met everyone there and we sort of opened the door and see, what's going on, it was just a very warm, inviting sort of experience, and the whole day was just awesome. So again, let's say 10 to 12 games on display were set up, and another third, so 5 to 6 that were in the contest but weren't set up. And so you had everyone, the designers were with their games for the most part, so you had big tables set up, numerous tables, and you'd have like your own little section where then you would have it set up, and people would walk around to play your game or to ask questions about your game, and you would sit there and give your spiel. And so again, shout out to Dan, because he not only came with me to keep me company, but I remember him, enthusiastically answering questions, playing the game, giving me a break when I needed one, right? Because you're doing this all day. So shout out to him, because he didn't have to do that, and I definitely remember that sort of sticking out to me, and it probably played a role in determining, how I ended up doing. I think it probably had a factor, his enthusiasm. That certainly helps. I mean, he's my friend, but it's one thing to have the designer, him or herself, playing the game enthusiastically. It's another thing to have someone else doing that. Granted, it would have been even better if it was a complete stranger, but it wasn't me, it was someone else in addition to me, wholeheartedly sort of endorsing the game. So that obviously helped my case, and so thank you again, Dan. So if I remember correctly, it was kind of just open to the public. Whoever wanted to could just show up and go around and play the different games. Now, in reality, most of the people that showed up are probably gamers in the Milwaukee area, specifically probably members of the Milcog gaming group. But I do remember various people just showing up throughout the day and getting the spiel, if you will, and the rules, and then actually playing the game itself numerous times throughout the day and throughout the evening. And it did get, sort of tiresome over time. I will say that I do remember, it's one thing to sort of play the game and endorse the game and have that level of enthusiasm early on. It's another thing to do that, 8 hours into it on your 10th game. Even if you're the designer, it's hard to maintain that same level of enthusiasm throughout the day. So for the most part, Dan and I sat at our own section of the garage, so to speak, explaining and playing the game. American Numismatists, again, it's the game I brought up there. Explaining and playing the game enthusiastically and so on. I wanted to mention real quick, as I was preparing for this video, it dawned on me that, the experience ironically kind of reminded me of what it was like growing up, going to these coin shows, which again was the sort of source or inspiration for the game itself, because you sit there at a certain area, right? So going back to the coin shows, these were much more massive exposition halls, right? Massive halls where you had hundreds of tables set up for coins, for the various coin dealers would each have their own tables, but then also sports cards, right? So on a much more massive scale, but it was the same sort of thing going on where you would sit there and kind of give a pitch, right? So much like at the coin show, I would answer questions for the customers and try to sell the coins. Well, at the competition, I would sit there and try to sell my game, so to speak, to the various people that were going around playing and judging the games. So I thought that was interesting, just kind of reminiscing on what it was like growing up, going to these coin shows, and then how I was reminded of that with the contest itself. And especially, one thing that stood out about going to these coin shows over the years was just how over time throughout the day it got tiresome. Like, you can only take so much of it, and then like 9 or 10 hours into being in this massive, huge building with just a constant sort of sound coming at you. It reminds me of being in a sports gym where there's just games going on everywhere. There's just constant noise coming at you. It's tiresome, and the whole experience was, again, reminiscent of the board game competition, explaining the game over and over and over. Hour 9 into the experience, it's just kind of the same sort of feelings I had, or the sense of exhaustion, if you will, that I had was reminiscent of, as a kid, what I would experience and feel like at the end of these days at the coin shows. Not to say that kind of sounds like it was a bad experience, but no, that was just, at the end of the day, after all those hours, after presenting the game so many times, it's going to get, you're going to get tired. And so that kind of reminded me again of growing up at these various coin shows and having that same sort of feeling. Okay, so for the most part, we are staying at our own section, kind of getting our own pitch, Dan and I, that is, for the game. But I do remember at various times kind of getting up and mingling with the various designers. And so one thing I wanted to, or sort of one memory that stands out that I wanted to convey was during one of these times, I can't remember, I think Dan was with me. We were kind of going around and, talking to the other designers and seeing how their games worked, and sitting down and trying them out if they were fairly short. And so anyway, I remember going to this one game, and it looks like a fairly complex economic kind of war game. And at the time, I'm thinking, I want to be fair to these other designers, and I want to kind of learn more about some of their designs as well. And what's the right word? I mean, to be fair is kind of not the right way to put it, but like show some camaraderie and some interest in sort of what they're doing, and again, maybe learn some things from them. So in view of that, I sat down to sort of try the game and hear from the designer how it works and so on. So I'm sitting down, and right away I remember, so Dan was there, kind of getting a weird look from him, like, is this a good idea? Just given how the game looked, it did look complex, like there would be a lot involved. And sure enough, fast forward like 20 to 30 minutes into it, I'm already, at this point, all these thoughts in the back of my mind, like how long, because this guy is the designer is explaining this game for all this time, for 20 to 30 minutes, and he's still going on, and it sounds like, there might be a lot more explanation to coming before we even start the game. And so at this point, 20 to 30 minutes into the rules explanation, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this was not a good idea. I'm never going to get back to my game to try to pitch it, right, before this guy gets done explaining his game, much less playing it. So all these kind of thoughts are going on. And again, I'm not trying to be rude. The whole impetus for me sitting down was just to be nice and, learn some things, and also to get to know people and so on. But I'm thinking all this. And fortunately, I think the designer, he could kind of relate and probably suspected, if I were in his shoes, I would want to be at my own game, representing it. And I think so anyway, the whole point was that 20 to 30 minutes in, he kind of looks at me and is like, I understand if you want to, bow out and get back to your game. I said, okay, thank you. I'll do so. This sounds really interesting and so on. And it did. By the way, that's one of the things I want to mention is there were some amazing games at this contest. I remember thinking there was a lot of potential, and that I really enjoy my own game. Obviously a biased opinion. I think it stands up and arguably was the best game there. But I'm thinking at the time there are a lot of other great games here as well. So including that one. But I definitely did take advantage of his that opportunity, right, that he offered to bow out at that point and return to my game. So one of the other things that I remember on the day itself was, so during the competition, was getting to meet James Mathe. So this guy at the time, this is 2010, he wasn't, again, this is to the best of my knowledge, he wasn't really a major player in the board game industry at that point. I think he was sort of taking off at that time, in large part due to, that's one of the things I want to look up is, I guess this was published 2011. This was one of the major early games for his company. So again, James Mathe was the guy, and Minion Games was his board game company. So he published games through that company, and I didn't know who this guy was at the time. And I think he hadn't really become a major player at that point either. But I did meet this guy. I remember him sort of standing out, and it was the guy that runs the show at Minion Games, and subsequently then he became very well known in the board game industry, in part because of some of his early successes, right, the Manhattan Project. But also he was a source of inspiration and guidance for a lot of up and coming designers. I know that he put forth a lot of effort to help up and coming designers to sort of enter the publishing process. What are some strategies, how to best go about the process. He offered a lot of guidance that's still available online that I remember consulting, afterwards. And I only learned in preparing for this video that he died. I don't remember the specifics, but it was a few years ago, I think. So which I didn't even know. So I just wanted to mention meeting this James Mathe guy, who was quite a character, who developed, a reputation in the board game industry. Meeting this guy on the day of the competition, he was a really friendly guy. Offered, my recollection was, and this is kind of, if you look into him, sort of his general reputation online as well. My recollection was him being funny and to the point sort of guy. Could be blunt, but sort of in your interest, if you will. He will tell you, I remember him just getting the point, and he will tell you what you need to hear, right? Not what you maybe want to hear, but what you need to hear. And that's, I think, probably in the best interest of anybody trying to get their games published. So I did want to mention again, here are some of the other games. I brought these because they are by Minion Games, his company. Just some examples of the games by his company that at least I have. I think there's probably even more over there, but these are just the ones I grabbed. So a major player in the board game industry that I definitely remember meeting on that day, and sadly he did pass away. But I do remember meeting him. I remember learning a lot from him, again, via his what he had to offer in terms of guidance for up-and-coming designers on the stuff he offers online, which you can still access to this day. At least that was the case a few months ago, the last I looked into it. Also want to mention that one thing that stood out, so as I mentioned, it kind of got, it was harder and harder throughout the day to retain that level of enthusiasm. No matter how enamored you are with your own game, there's only so many times you can explain and play it before you yourself get bored of it, right? In that same amount of that certain span of time. But fortunately, another thing that sort of stands out though is at the end of the conclusion of the night, at the end of the competition, sort of put the games away, and people have been drinking at this point, and people are ready to sort of take a break, and not a break, but like end the night. So this is at the very end, and we put everything away, put seats around in this massive circle, and it was the first time I had ever played Werewolf. I don't remember if it was One Night Werewolf or Werewolf. Anyway, I talked about One Night Werewolf in a previous video for this episode 1. It's a party game that accommodates a large range of players, and it was at this competition that I first played it, and I remember really enjoying it, and it was just a great time with. I couldn't believe there were games out there that could accommodate. I didn't know at that time that could accommodate so many people, because we probably had 30 or 40 people playing this game at the end of the night. So that definitely, maybe 20, 30, 40, somewhere in there. And that's a pretty big range, but it was a lot of people, and it definitely stood out in my mind. A lot of fun, and just how everybody seemed to be having a great time. It was a great way to end the night. And again, kudos to Jamey, Phillip, and his wife and his family. I believe they have 2 kids. Again, for being so accommodating, offering drinks and so on throughout the day and throughout the night. Great people, and not only him, not only James Mathe, but really everyone I met, including all the designers. I just remember it being a fantastic time, a fantastic experience, and everybody being super social and willing to help each other as well, and seemingly wanting what's best for everyone else, in addition to themselves. Obviously, you want to win the game, win the contest, but it seemed like they were, at the same time, right? People were willing to offer guidance, and I'll give you specific examples as we move forward here. How the winner of the contest himself offered some guidance to me. So stay tuned for that. I think that's all I want to say about the day of the contest itself and what that was like, and what some of my major memories were. I'll go ahead and move on to section 3 here, where we'll talk about sort of the aftermath, if you will. What ended up happening? Did I win? Well, as I just mentioned, or implied at least, no, right? There was a different winner of the contest. But I'll talk a little bit more about who the winner was, how I ended up doing, and what some of my, I guess, sort of my general thoughts were regarding the whole contest, and some reflections, if you will. Some takeaways, that's the word I was looking for. Some general takeaways from the entire process. So my game was well received. I ended up being runner-up, so second place, if you will, to Kane. Klenko is the name of the designer of the winning game, and in fact, so we'll go ahead and just show off the winning game. So this was Pressure Cooker, or is Pressure Cooker, Kane Klenko's winning game. So this game won the contest, the 2010 Rio Grande Games Design Contest, and I remember going over to the setup. I remember his game and thinking it looked interesting. So the day of the contest, I don't know, I don't remember how long it was until we found out the results, but we had no idea who won or who came in second, or et cetera, when we're going around the day of. But I do remember, looking at his game, hearing about his game. I didn't sit down to play it or anything, but it did stand out as looking really nice. He did a good job in terms of the prototype and the setup, and I remember thinking it seemed pretty straightforward, and it did stand out. I remember his game standing out amongst the 10 to 12 that were set up there. But anyway, so no, I did not win. Kane Klenko's Pressure Cooker won. But I did get runner-up, or second place, and there was a lot of really positive feedback from others, from the judges and so on. It was obviously a little disappointing to come so close, and that close, and to see what ended up happening then to Kane Klenko, who now he's pretty well established in the industry, has some games published under his belt. In fact, let me see, right? So to have come so close, it was disappointing, right? But at the same time, it was really encouraging to get runner-up and to get such good feedback from others. So it's kind of a bittersweet sort of end result, if you will. But Mr. Klenko has Fuse. This is his highest ranked game on Board Game Geek. It's ranked 804 right now, and this is our favorite. As far as I know, I have 3. I think I have 3 of his games, including the one that won the 2010 contest. This one, Pressure Cooker. And I will say, out of his 3 that we have, this is my least favorite. And respectfully, I think it's a decent game, but I do think my game is better. Sorry, Mr. Klenko. Now, obviously, I'm biased, right? But I do think, I think my game is better, but I actually really do like some of his other designs, I should say. So Fuse, my kids, to this day, we haven't probably played this in a few years, but my youngest, Zoe, will still say things like, "Can we play that dice game?" Blah, blah, and she'll be referring to Fuse. This is a great game that I don't remember, let's see, when did this one come out? 2015. So a few years after his rookie effort here, I think this is the first one that he had published. He came out with Fuse, which was this is probably my favorite by him. We also liked this one quite a bit. So Pandemic's a major cooperative game that's kind of considered a major gateway game. You probably heard of it, or many of you have. And this is sort of an spinoff that incorporates, so his main shtick, if you will, is real time. There's some sort of real time element involved in all of these games. So there's a timer where you're under pressure, if you will, pressure cooker, right? And all of his games fuse, right? You have a certain amount of time to get something done. So that's, again, kind of a recurring theme in all of his games, which is interesting, and he's kind of known for that. And that's involved here as well. So I guess in general, just to reflect on Mr. Klenko's designs, I think he's a good designer. Pressure Cooker wasn't my favorite. I do think I like American Numismatists better than Pressure Cooker, but he has produced some pretty good designs. After all, I have 3 of his games in the collection. Another major one that he's come up with that is ranked pretty high that I actually don't have is called Dead Men Tell No Tales. And that's ranked. That's the second highest ranked game, and that's 1,131st. I should mention. Oh, I didn't get Flip Ships. We do have another one, a 4th one, Flip Ships, which I remember liking quite a bit as well. So he's, let me just at a glance, I want to say he has. I could be wrong here, but let's say 10 to 12 published games at this point. And Pressure Cooker, echoing my sentiment, is not one of his better games. It's ranked 12,829th on the Geek. And again, that is the game that won the contest. So again, reflecting back, Mr. Klenko's Pressure Cooker won the game. It was kind of I really wanted to win the game, or win the contest, especially at that time, because I was so immersed in this. I just really started getting into the groove in terms of designing my design process. I really refined some of the aspects of that design process and felt like I was really getting good at it. And to have all that positive feedback, right? I was really eager and wanting to do really well in the board game industry, if you will, to perhaps get my games published and be able to focus more time into actually publishing board games. And so it was great to hear all that positive sort of feedback, and that's in turn then what kind of made it, like I said, bittersweet then to hear the end result of not quite winning, right? To be the runner-up. Again, kind of a bittersweet outcome, but I think it was a great experience overall. Despite not winning it, I do think so. I mentioned how there was a lot of positive feedback. It gave me confidence, in terms of my designs. Obviously, I felt like I had ability, and that's why I entered the game. I thought it had some merit. That's why I entered the game into the contest. But it's another thing then, and it's one thing to hear your friends talk about the game and to have Dan talk about it enthusiastically, but then to actually have others who you don't know, right, to say positive things about your game. It really does give you then confidence. So I gleaned a lot of confidence from the experience. In terms of my board game designing ability. And, that's something that I have carried with me to this day. Where am I? So I wanted to mention that despite not winning at all, so to speak, it was, I think, a very formidable and positive experience nonetheless. It gave me a lot of confidence to keep at it, to keep designing games. And I think one day, I will give the publishing game another shot. It's just, over time since that competition, I haven't really tried to get my stuff published anymore. But ever since that competition, again, I have the confidence that someday, if I do want to try again, that I do have the ability. And why haven't I gotten more involved? Well, again, because of the kids and because, I have a job teaching, right, where I can't invest that much time anymore into trying to get it done. But the competition, the contest, hearing all that positive feedback from the judges and from other players, that was great in terms of giving me the confidence I needed to keep designing these games after, 10 years later, right, to keep the momentum going and to keep designing the games, at least when I have a chance. I did want to mention Kane Klenko again. It kind of stood out. So the winner, right? I want to mention how one of the memories was him coming over, and actually I didn't know this guy at the time. Right, it was just another guy coming into my area of the garage, wanting to learn about my game, and I don't even think I knew at first that he was actually in the the contest himself. And I remember this guy coming over, and hearing my pitch and listening and sort of, I might even, played the game and offering his sort of take and suggestions. And my initial reaction was like, who is this guy? Like, why does he seem so invested? But I didn't make too much of sort of his tips at the time, but fast forward like 5-10 years later, and actually what he said made a lot of sense, and it was kind of like, duh, I couldn't believe, and that, I guess it's a reflection on how I was still a rookie at the time in terms of designing some of the elements of the design process. But looking back, some of the suggestions were like, duh, like why wouldn't I have done that in the first place? So anyway, I do remember him coming over, Kane Klenko, the eventual winner of the contest, and now well-established designer in his own right. Him coming over at the time, not knowing who this dude was, and listening to me, taking the time to hear me out and understand how my game works, and then to not only do that while he's got his own game in the competition, but then to actually put notes down on a piece of paper and share them with me. Kane Klenko, here, this is actually the piece of paper you handed to me 13 years ago with your suggestions. I still keep it in my file folder for the game. The major one that stood out in terms of the why didn't I think of that, was he recommended for the different denominations having them color coded, or maybe even like a different symbol. So there's pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, half dollars, and dollars. And at the time, they were just on the same colored background. And so it's, you have different coins at all these different spots. And so they're all the same color. It's hard to differentiate. You're trying to get a nickel. Well, which ones of them are nickels? And so he's saying, look, why don't you put the nickels, have them be yellow, all the quarters be blue, in the background and so on. And so wouldn't that be give you a much clearer indication of where the nickels are from a glance? Duh. Great suggestion. He had been designing games for a lot longer at that point, or at least that's what I tell myself. How could I not have thought of that? Awesome suggestion. And so needless to say, fast forward, right, to later versions of the game, and of course, all the coins are, I'll show you this later, but all the coins are, of course, color-coded by denomination. So I remember meeting Mr. Klenko, thinking at first, like, who is this guy? Color-coded, okay, I'll take that into account, but didn't really think much of it at the time. And then as the years passed by, it's like, yeah, that's an obvious improvement to the game. And then, of course, he became, I don't know if famous is the right word, but a pretty well-established designer in his own right. And so it's kind of interesting just to reflect back on, Ken Klenko at one point, right, had suggestions for my game. I still have that piece of paper. So shout out to Mr. Klenko. Congratulations, by the way, if you ever watch this, on your success. I'm not the biggest fan of Pressure Cooker per se, not that it's a bad game, but I do think you make some great games. And so kudos to you for your success post 2010 in that contest. And he did get then, right, his game published, so he was the winner, and this again is the game that won. And real quick, the gist of this is you are taking orders and trying to put together the various orders, and again, there's that real-time element that he includes in, to my knowledge, all of his games that's involved here, hence the pressure, right, that's involved. I think that might, for the most part, wrap up what I wanted to say. I guess I'll just wrap up by mentioning that, again, I did glean a greater sense of confidence from the whole process, despite not winning. And as we'll find out, especially in Part 8, where I got involved in some business aspects of the board game industry, as will become more apparent in Part 8 when we talk about that, I'm not the salesperson type, and the stars might have to align for me maybe someday to have my games be published, right? Because I'm not the type to go out and pitch them real hard. I'm the type to instead set that game aside and start immediately designing another game totally unrelated. That's just who I am, and I have sort of learned that even more, I guess, through a lot of these different events that took place, right, through my board game design career, if you will, including this whole process, right? It's just not for me, and I think that's maybe why in part I didn't follow my dad's footsteps and selling something, right? Whether it be sports cards or rare American coins or board games. Even though I dabbled in it, as we'll talk about in part 8, in some sense I tried to sell my game in the contest. It's really not for me. So even though I've tried it here and there, again, I have gleaned what I already kind of intuitively knew from the get-go, and that I'm not really much of a salesman. I'm more the creative type that enjoys the creative process, right, before you get to that finished product and try to sell it. And real quick one to mention, so I already alluded to this earlier, but over the years then I did establish or create this offshoot, this card collecting version of American Numismatists, which we haven't really talked about the game itself, how it works, what it's like. We haven't really talked much about that. I've really focused on the competition or the contest up to this point. So let's go ahead then and finish part 6 here with section 4, where we'll take a closer look on the table at American Numismatists itself, some of its components, how the game plays, what it's like, and then not only that, but also take a quick look at card collectors as well. As promised, here's game number 13, American Numismatists, set up on the table. This is the game that I submitted to the 2010 Rio Grande Games Design Contest. As I did with all my games in part 5, I'm going to begin just by reading the game overview. In American Numismatists, numismatists can refer to any coin collecting enthusiast, but usually refers to someone who is an expert in the field. Players assume the roles of rare American coin dealers serving wealthy coin collectors. The goal is to become the most credible dealer by scoring credibility points. The first player to reach 10 credibility points on his or her turn wins, which is done primarily by servicing these collectors. Players take turns one by one, using all 5 of the actions they are allotted. Among other things, these actions allow them to travel to coin shops in order to purchase the coins they need to satisfy their collectors. Unfortunately, theft is always a threat in the coin business, and players will need to make wise use of their safes, which, for one action, they can access in order to secure up to 3 of their coins. Players can also use their actions to conduct research and make investments, which provide additional ways to gain credibility. All 90 coins in the game, 15 coins in each of 6 denominations, are individually ranked in terms of their value, and the player who possesses the most valuable coin nets an additional credibility point. The game immediately ends when one of the following happens. The coin tile stack is exhausted, that is, the last face down coin tile is turned over. 2, the collector card deck is exhausted, that is, the last face down card is turned over. Or 3, a player tallies 10 credibility points, in which case he or she is immediately declared the winner. If one of the first 2 end game conditions occurs, which rarely ever happens, I don't know that it's ever happened, the player with the most credibility points of the game at the time wins the game. And really the reason why the other 2 end game conditions were sort of put in place was just in case, for whatever reason the game were to linger, you can't find your coins that you need for your particular collectors, whatever the case may be, right? There's still going to be sort of an end will come regardless of what happens in the game. But really, for all intents and purposes, the game ends as soon as somebody hits 10 credibility points. You got to remember, I created this game during the Catan heyday, at least for me, the Settlers of Catan heyday. That was my gateway game, and so I created this a year and a half into my strategy board game career, if you will, when I first started playing and designing games. And so that's still, definitely in the time period when I was playing Catan extensively. And so, not surprisingly, then, one of the influences that game had on this game was you played a 10 points for all intents and purposes. Again, there are those 2 other end game conditions, but I honestly can't remember either of the other 2 ever coming into play. Somebody always wins by 10 points. So, at the outset, as is probably, you could probably infer, this is one of my more played games. Again, I submitted it to the contest for a reason, and it has seen, I don't know if I want to say extensive revisions. Really, the core gameplay, the mechanics, and how the game works, that really hasn't changed. What's changed, though, over the years, and what this game has seen, is extensive revisions in terms of components, how the board looks, you know, I started off with just, as you saw earlier in this part, right, where I started with a big foam board, and then over the years, right, the components have gotten whittled down to less and less space. So you could put all this, and I literally keep it all in this, including the expansion. So a lot of this stuff over here is the expansion material, including all sorts of different coin shops you can set up in different ways. But I've just kept things simple as I usually do for the purposes of these sort of game overviews. And I've set up the game as if it was the base setup, no expansion stuff, for 3 players. So we have Timmy, Tommy, and myself here. So 3 players. And again, this game, it has seen probably out of all my games, arguably the most play, up there with like Sophia and maybe 1 or 2 of the others. But the core gameplay has remained the same for the most part. What has changed is the components, and I have developed an expansion for the game over the years, which I think really adds to the game as well. But anyway, so how does the game work? Basically, it's an action selection game. You're going to get 5 actions on your turn, starting with the first player. So as I mentioned, I set this up for 3 players. So I believe it's blue player, or Tommy, I think is his name, is going to start the game. So it's set up. You begin by drawing coins and putting them face up on all these initial spaces. So I believe there's 21 total spaces, including the shops, and then plus these 2 auction spaces. In the expansion, there's an online coin shop as well. But again, we're not going to get into that for the purposes of this video. So you set up all the initial coins so the players can see what's available initially. And then what happens is, starting with the player who's going to go last, take their turn last, which would be Timmy, red, he gets to pick his starting shop first. So he puts his player token out here. By the way, we all start with 3 player tokens. One kept near us on our safe board to help track our actions as well, and then to just indicate what color we are. 1 on the credibility tracker, and then 1 on the board itself, or in other words, 1 that's going to indicate where we are, what location we're at on the board. So there's all these shops, and that's what I mean by the board. Okay, so Timmy's red token is going to move and always be at one of these shops. And at the beginning of the game, he gets to, since he's going last, taking his turn last, he gets to put his player token out on the board first. And not only that, he gets to put the sale cube or token or whatever at the same shop. And that's always going to be a benefit, because basically it subtracts how many actions it takes to acquire coins at that particular shop. So even though he's going to go last, he's going to, you know, be able to pick where he starts first, which is an advantage, and the sale token is going to start at his shop as well. Then we're going to go second, so we put our token out next, and so we went ahead and just put it in the central location. And then Tommy, since he's going to go first, he places his out here as well. And I should say, you can't place yours at the same shop as someone else, although once the game starts, players can move anywhere no matter where other players are. So we could all be at the same spot. And then at that point, everybody's ready to play. So starting with Tommy, I believe, he would take then his turn. And as I intimated earlier, on your turn, you get 5 actions. And what can you do on your actions? Well, it's indicated here on our handy dandy player reference card. So you could trade. You can trade any coin tiles at any time on your turn with someone else. And there you have another Catan influence, right? Always keeping other players active even when it's not their turn. Now all trades, just like Catan, have to involve the player whose turn it is. You can trade any coins you have, as well as, if you're playing with the expansion, any action chips you have. Again, I'm not going to get into the expansion, but so the trading is an option. You can also travel. There's going to be lots of traveling. So for one of your actions, you can just move. So actually, it's Tommy going first, so maybe he doesn't want to be there anymore. One action, he can just move. So these 2 aren't adjacent, and I do include somewhere there's sort of stick things that you can lay out here to indicate where you can move from each shop. So really, the idea is you can move here or to here, but you can't go here. So this would all be indicated. You know, you can use those stick thingies if you wanted to make it clearer. But that's kind of how moving works. And so you can go any number of spaces, like you could go, 2 if you wanted to get down here. And so then you'd have 3 actions left. And each player on their safe board, this is called the safe board, and I'll say what the safe's all about here in a second, but you can also then track your actions, what you have left on your safe board or your player board. So traveling, you're going to travel a lot in this game, and so that's one of the major things you can do. I mentioned the safe. You can access your safe. That costs 1 action to access it, and once you access the safe, then you can put in or take out any coins you want. So basically, it costs an action to access the safe, and then you can do whatever you want with your inventory. So the way the safe works is over time, let's just say I had acquired some of these. These out here in my tableau, if you will, right, my play area, if they're out here and not on my safe, they are kind of vulnerable. Anything in your safe can't be stolen, basically. And so, especially if you have more valuable coins, you're going to want to try to get them into your safe. And so again, to do that, you need to access your safe, which costs an action. So again, you're going to be acquiring these various coins during the game. Let's say I had some of these. Okay, so for an action, I could put my most valuable ones in there. And speaking of most valuable, how do you know what's most valuable? Well, on each coin, you can kind of get a general sense based on how many actions it's going to take to acquire the coin. But then it specifically tells you here, okay, what the rank is of the coin. First in the denomination, so in this case, this is a dollar coin. So it's the 8th most valuable of dollar coins, and it's the 18th overall most valuable coin in the entire game out of all 90. So again, there's 15 of each denomination, 15 pennies, 15 quarters, $15, 15 half dollars. And so all of them are ranked. So this is then the worst quarter in the game. This is the lowest valued or rated, and what is the ranking based on? Just how much the coin's worth. And that was its value, roughly its value back when I originally designed the game, so you know, a decade and a half ago. But anyway, so this is the worst quarter in the game and the 73rd worst coin overall in the game. So you can kind of get a sense then, like, look here, this is the 2nd most valuable nickel in the game. So it's, you know, it's going to be highly coveted probably, because what you're trying to do, a lot of what you're trying to do is, right, get these coins to then sell, if you will, to these collectors, a lot of whom want, you know, top valued denominations or coins in those denominations. So to satisfy Sonny, you're going to need not just $4 coins, but 4 top $5 coins. So that's pretty hard, which is why it's worth quite a few points. Okay, so that's the gist of it. So then again, why do you want to access your safe? Well, you want to get your more valuable coins in there. And why not? Every time you access your safe, you might as well be putting, you know, as many coins in there as you can, even if they're not so good. Like, you know, at this point, none of these are really that great. But, you know, I don't lose anything by keeping them in there. So accessing that safe is one of the things you can do. You can bank your actions, which again is an expansion activity. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. Basically, it's just an opportunity, if you're using the expansion, to sort of set aside some of your actions for a later turn and use them for a more substantial turn later. Same thing with submit special collection. That I'm not going to talk about that either. That's an expansion activity that you can do. So one of the things you can do is number 6 there, move the sale location. So we talked about how the last player to go gets to place, you know, decide where the initial location of the sale token. So there's always a sale at one of the locations, 5 locations if you're using the base setup. And so on your turn, again, one of the things you can do is move the sale location for 2 actions. So you could just move it to wherever you are, and then from that point forward, any coin you acquire is going to require 1 less action. Speaking of which, you know, one of the things you can do that's coming up is buy a coin or acquire the coin, spending the requisite actions to do so. And again, if you have the sale, if the sale is at that location, then instead of 4, this is only going to require 3. Instead of 2, this is only going to require 1. And they always require 1. So all coins are going to require at least 2 actions on you know, as a sort of base or standard level. But then with the sale, it can be -1. And there's also other ways through investments to knock down the actions required to get the coins. And so there's always this requirement, though, that you have to spend at least 1 action to acquire a coin. But anyway, so you can move that sale location. You can also draw a face down collector card for 2 actions. So again, one of the main way you're going to score points in this game is to acquire the coins and then sell them to the collectors. So for 2 actions, you can draw a face down one from the top of the deck. Okay, and so you don't know what you're getting. Now I have a customer, a collector, Abigail Jane, who, in order to satisfy her, right, in her want list, so to speak, I need to provide 2 quarters. And if I do that, then I would, this is actually in my hand until I sell them to her, so to speak, in which case then I set this face up in my tableau, and I would get, I'd have to spend 2 actions, and I would get rid of the coins up here. That's when they would go up here. So let's say I had used this one in the process, right? It's a quarter. She doesn't require, top 5 or anything like that, so that's why she's not worth as much. And let's say I had, another quarter. For example, I acquired this one too. So if I sold to her, right, I no longer own these. I put them up here in the sold coins tracker. I would put the collector card face up, and now I have 1 point, and I would move this. Okay. So again, one of the things you can do is acquire the face down collector card for 2 actions. Okay. And as it says there, you can't keep more than 3 collector cards in hand. So if you draw one and you already have 3, you have to replace the one that you have. Talked about moving, let's see, the sale, I need to go down here. So I talked about buying the coins. Wherever you're at, you have to be at the location. And by the way, as soon as one is bought, you immediately replace it. So you could sit there and buy one. Whoops, let's say I did this one. It was only 1 action because of the sale. And let's say it's at the beginning of my turn. That's only 1 action. I could sit there and say, okay, I want to buy this one, another action. So I've only spent 2 actions. And I could sit there and just see what keeps coming. And so, actually, I really like this, the best quarter in the game. For my remaining 3 actions, because again, these only cost 1 apiece since that was there, I could also then acquire this, the best quarter in the game. So I acquired 3 coins, which usually would have cost 8 actions, for only 5 actions thanks to the sale. And again, every time you anytime a coin is acquired from one of these spaces, it's immediately replaced. Okay, so we talked about gaining a face-down collector card. We talked about buying coins. Talked about selling coins. I kind of did some of this out of order. All right, and I talked about how you go about selling the coins. Okay, you would have to, again, get rid of them from your play area, and you can take them from your safe as well. Okay, so we talked about selling coins. Face-down research tiles. So for 3 actions, so these are ordered in terms of how many actions. So we talked about spending 2 actions to acquire a face-down collector card. Well, for 3 actions, you can acquire a face-down research card. So this is another way to earn points throughout the game, or credibility points, I should say. So for 3 actions, you can acquire the top face-down one. Okay, it's always going to require more actions to get something that's face-up. So 4 actions would be required to acquire one of these. It's only 3 to acquire this one. Similarly, it's only 2 to acquire the face-down one you don't know, right, what it is. It's only 2 to acquire that one, whereas it's 3 to acquire one of these. So anyway, going back to this, right, the research, you can acquire a face-down research tile for 3 actions, and you would just draw that then. Well, actually, this is an expansion tile, so we're not going to talk about that. It's basically just a wild. So that would be what I do. I put it immediately face up. Anytime you acquire a research tile, you just put it face up in your play area. And let's say I acquired some more throughout the game. You'd set these here. Maybe on a later turn I see that 10 center, so I want to start accumulating not only different ones, but you're also going to get points for if you have similar ones. So speaking of that, why do you want to acquire these research tiles? Well, that's another way you can earn points in addition to the primary way, which, as I mentioned earlier, is through acquiring the coins and then selling them ultimately to the collectors, as we did with Abigail Jane. So again, the research is another way you can earn points. And the way that works is, again, you get sort of rewarded both for how many different denominations you have and for how many in the denomination, each of the denominations you have. And the idea is you're becoming sort of a renowned expert in those particular denominations. So, you know, if you get a certain number of them, well, you're considered well-rounded and you're going to get rewarded for that. And so too, if you get a certain number within the same denomination, you're considered an expert in that particular type and you're going to get rewarded for that. And specifically then, this is how you earn the extra points then. And so that top part, I should say, is part of the expansion rules. So really, the bottom part is what's included in the base game. So as soon as you get 4 of the same denomination, so for example, we have 2 here, but if we were to acquire 2 more of the dimes, then boom, we would get immediately 1 credibility point. And you would immediately indicate that here once you get it in your tableau. And similarly then, if you get different ones, so if you get another one, so if I were to acquire then 5 of the dimes, and I believe there's only 5 of each type in the game. So if you were to acquire all the dimes, then you would get 2 credibility points. And then don't forget, as you're amassing these, right, you also get rewarded for the different types. So if you get 4 different kinds, right now we only have 2 different denominations, but if we were to get 2 more, then we would start earning points as well. And if you get 1 of each of the 6 different ones, you can get 3. So as you can see, it's going to require an investment, so to speak, but you can generate a fair number of points that way. Okay, so again, that is the research tiles. So you can acquire a face-down research tile for 3 actions, or one of the face-up ones for 4 actions. Okay, so then talked about the face-down collector cards. Face-up collector cards. All right, so if you draw one without knowing what it is, that's 2 actions, or you can draw one of these face-up ones. That's 3 actions. And again, as soon as one's drawn, it's immediately replaced. Okay. So we talked about face-up collector cards. Investment cards is another interesting wrinkle. So these are similar to the Catan development cards. Okay. Oh, I should say, as soon as somebody acquires a coin in the game, they're immediately going to get this because by default, right, they're going to have the most valuable coin. And basically, whoever has the most valuable coin in their possession, whether it's locked up in their safe or outside their safe, they're going to have this in their possession. They're going to receive this and have an extra credibility point. So let's say Tommy didn't get anything on his turn, and somehow we have all these coins, right? We're the only one with a coin. Okay, so we have that right now. But if we lose this, let's say Timmy gets it later, then we would go down and he would go up. All right, so this is always floating around. Whoever has at any given point the most valuable coin. All right, and there's always going to be the most valuable, right? Because every coin in the game is ranked on this right side here, and there's only 1 of each number all the way through 90. So somebody's always going to have the most valuable. Whoever that is will retain this for a point. Where was I? So, oh yeah, investment cards. So another thing you can do is draw, and they do require an investment, so to speak, of your actions, 3 actions. You're going to draw these. So I went ahead beforehand and set them out where we can see 1 of each. So on your turn, you can use any of your investment cards that you acquired, and basically you get to do what they say. So, I mean, not necessarily on your turn, there's certain times when they might be applicable. So, and that should be obvious from the card itself. So on your, whenever you play this, you can trade in, that is, any 2 coins in your inventory for 1 that is presently available at any coin shop. So I could play that, it goes to the discard, and then I turn in, let's say these 2, these just get discarded, and I could take 1 that is presently available at any coin shop. So where's that one that was pretty valuable? I mean, this quarter's not bad, right? So we would maybe take that. So that's trade. Then we have auction. That's the way that these coins are acquired. If you draw this card, you immediately reveal it and discard the card and get for free. Well, it did require an investment, but whatever those are, you would immediately get them. Sometimes they're really good, sometimes they're not so great, and then these are immediately replaced. So that's auction. Overtime. So that's an interesting card. That can help you save up for a really powerful turn. Just like it says, whenever you play it, boom, you get 5 extra actions. So you have to play that on your turn, but it just boosts how many actions you're going to get. Snoop. So just like it says, view the collector cards of any one opponent, and then exchange, if you want, 1 of your collector cards for 1 of theirs. So that can be pretty powerful, especially if you see, let's say, an opponent that's about to win. You kind of see them building up in, say, quarters. Okay, you can play that card, view their hand, and voila, you see the collector that wanted all those quarters and you snag it. And now all those quarters they've been hoarding are relatively worthless. So it's going to take them longer to win, if they're going to win at all. This is a very powerful card. It's akin to the victory point card in the development deck of Settlers of Catan. It gives you a credibility point. You can show it right away, or you can reveal it later. Let's say, again, you are working your way up, and you know you have this in hand, nobody else knows, and they see, oh, you sold some coins for 2 credibility points. They think they're still safe because you're at 9. Well, no, they're not safe, because then you reveal that and immediately win. Okay, so there's, I want to say 4 of those in the deck, so where they just give you a point, so those are awesome. Then you have steal any 1 coin from another player's inventory. That's where the safe comes in, right? Except for coins secured in their safe. So that's why you want to lock up your most valuable coins so that they can't steal them. All right, and that might sway, not only might it be good because they're trying to get a specific coin that you have, but it might be super valuable and it might give them this as well. So that's steal. Laziness. Now this was the subject of some debate, certainly over the years. And the reason is some people don't like that you spend actions and then the upshot being you might get this card where you don't get anything out of it. Your human nature takes over and nothing happens, right? So you can hold on to this card if you want and have them thinking maybe you have, what was it, coin show, which gives you, right, a point. But lo and behold, you're just lazy and you don't have any points, right, in your hand. But really, the upshot is that doesn't do anything. So again, that some people didn't like how, you know, you would invest these actions and then get nothing in return. And if your gaming group doesn't like that, you know what? Take out the laziness card. That's fine. But we always play with it. So here's another type of card, friend card. And the way this works is, I mentioned the sale token. Well, it works very similarly to the sale token, except you put this in front of you, right? You immediately replace or reveal it and place it face up in front of you. And from that point forward, any coins that you acquire from that particular location, in this case the Northeast Coin Shop, they're going to cost you 1 less action. So that's very powerful. Okay, you're buddy-buddy with the owner of that coin shop. So these are pretty nice investment cards as well. A lot of these, other than the laziness, are, you know, they're pretty good. So these are extra. I'm not going to go through these, but they're extra. I think there's 4 different ones that come with the expansion then, that you add to the deck as well if you're using the expansion, if you want to. I guess you can think of them as modules. The expansion adds a lot of different things that can be used, right? They don't have to all be used. It's not an all or nothing thing. Where did I put it? I think this differentiates, yeah. The expansion, and it differentiates all the different modules, if you will. Different components that weren't in the base game, different additions that you can use. And so including, as we were just talking about, those new investment cards. So we went through each one of those in turn, and as hopefully you gathered, hopefully, just how powerful some of those can be. So we talked about investment cards. We talked about the face-up research tiles, right? Those cost 4, so those are going to require quite an investment in terms of your actions. And the last thing, this doesn't happen that often, but it can be super powerful, and it does happen occasionally, and that's the bully action. And it's somewhat hard unless you're using the expansion, when you can save up actions for later via those action chips. But otherwise, if you're just using the base game rules, bullying is going to be fairly difficult because it requires essentially your whole turn. Unless you have, what was it, overtime, which gives you 5 extra actions on your turn. But the gist is, for 5 actions, you can bully another player into trading you 1 coin from their inventory that is not in their safe. So again, provided it's not in their safe, this works, okay? And then you have to give them, right, 2 of yours. So there's 3, you choose all 3 coins, okay, involved. So it's 2 from your collection, whether it's in your safe or not, and then 1 that can't be from their safe, right? You're picking all 3 of these coins though. And you both have to be at the same coin shop. So that's an important point, right? You have to be at the same coin shop for this to happen. So let's say that I was bullying Tommy, right? So I'm at the same spot. He has a coin that I really want. And so without any special sort of card or anything like that, he's going to have to be at my location at the beginning of my turn. Because again, it's going to require all 5 actions. Okay, but provided that's the case, let's say he had this nickel that I really wanted, the second most valuable nickel in the game. All right, I could bully him, since we're both at the same location, for all 5 of my actions. I would immediately put this as a security guard token, and it indicates the bully, whoever takes the next bully action, it can't be at that same location. And that ensures, amongst other things, that Tommy is not just going to steal it right back his next turn. Right? Whenever that action's taken, subsequently, it has to be at a different shop. Okay, but anyway, so that's placed there. He has to give me, I say, give me that, you should have locked it up, and I'm going to give you my 2 crappiest coins. Let's give you that, and this one. So that's how the bully action works. Again, it doesn't happen all that frequently, especially in the base game, but when it does, it can be, you know, a game changer. So anyway, those are all the options to you on your turn. And you're going through and you're spending these actions to essentially, for the most part, again, to acquire the coins that are required to satisfy the want list, if you will, of the collectors that you've become familiar with through the game, right? Because you've acquired them basically and added them to your hand. There are these other ways to acquire points, as we talked about. Okay, but for the most part, you're buying and selling then these coins to these various collectors, trying to be the first one to reach 10 credibility points. Okay? And that is American Numismatists. As suggested, I'm not really going to go through the expansion, other than to add there are a fair number of modules, like I suggested, that you can add. And I really do think they spice it up a bit, and they don't really add that much in terms of the game length either. So I really enjoy, and anytime we play nowadays, we basically employ all the modules of the expansion. I really enjoy them. And that's a relatively recent addition. I think I created most of the expansion modules, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. So relatively recently in terms of the history of the game, right? This game, again, I want to say I made in 2010 or 2009. What's it say? Well, that's the revised with the expansion. Again, I think it goes back to 2009, maybe. So that's American Numismatists. Lots of this is Kane Klenko's notes that I referenced earlier in this video from the contest, and then all kinds of playtesting notes throughout the years in here. Lots in this file, so to speak, but just doodlings, and there's a notes on Hume's A Treatise of Human Nature randomly in there. Anyway, that's American Numismatists. I'm going to go ahead and show you briefly the spin-off that I created, Card Collectors, which I've already referenced throughout this video in part 6. But we're going to go ahead and take a much briefer look at that now. And voila! American Numismatists has morphed into Card Collectors. You don't like coins, you say? And you like sports cards? Maybe you used to. The idea of collecting sports cards appeals to you a lot more for whatever reason. Well, that's basically what happened with me and why this game emerged. So again, it is basically a spin-off of American Numismatists. I'm not going to get into the rules or go through an extensive sort of overview of the game and how it plays, because for all intents and purposes, it basically is a mirror image of American Numismatists, with a few exceptions, which I will talk a little bit more about. In general, though, again, the main difference is instead of collecting different denominations of coins, specifically 6 different denominations, as was the case in American Numismatists, here you're collecting, or not necessarily collecting, because really your prerogative here is to buy and then sell the cards you acquire to the collectors. But the idea here is that you are acquiring sports cards instead. And so why is there one missing there? I don't know. So I'm just going to draw one here. But that's, obviously a chief difference. And as I alluded to earlier, those are just examples of the cards that are in the game. As I alluded to earlier, growing up, and even to this day, I am much more into collecting sports cards. Not that I do it anymore, really, although I do have a buddy, shout out to Dave, who very much is into buying and selling cards still, and he has me every now and then getting more Barry Sanders cards into my collection. I do enjoy adding to that every now and then. But for the most part, this is more, when I was younger, I used to collect cards all the time. And so I can definitely, I relate to the idea of collecting these cards a lot more than I do to the coins in American Numismatists. But again, in general, there is this sort of parallel. So instead of collecting the different denominations of coins, though, here you're collecting the different types of sports cards, specifically 4 different types: baseball, football, hockey, and basketball. And I will say, so there's a different number, and that's one of the differences then, right, is there's 4 different types of sports, whereas in the American Numismatist, we're dealing with 6 different denominations. So that affects the research, for example, and actually I threw in this 5th type, rookie. So, one of the differences then between American Numismatists and then this spin-off, this sports collector, or card collectors, I should say, is how the research works, right? And the balancing of that, it was a little different because there's, sorry about that, 5 different types, including the rookie, available via research in this game, whereas there was 6 in the American Numismatist. And so, in terms of balancing the game, the credibility you can earn by way of research is a little bit different. So that's, I guess, one of the major differences. Otherwise, like I mentioned, for the most part, it completely parallels the American Numismatists, including the setup. All that's the same. Ultimately, right, this is an older board. You could have update the board like I did with American Numismatists and have all different sorts of configurations. Again, these indicate where you can travel in terms of from each shop, right? The sale token, the security guy token, right, for the bullying activity, just like an American Numismatist. So again, we have a summary of activities you can do here, pretty much the exact same as American Numismatist, the one exception being submit special collection. So that is a major difference, other than the, I already mentioned and talked about the other major difference being, the number of different types of cards in the game, right? The other major difference is this National Sports Card Exhibition Center. So this affords players another opportunity or way to collect points, score points, and the ultimate objective, just like American Numismatist, is to get to 10 points. So seriously, other than this, which I'll say a little bit more about here in a second, and the different number of or types of cards in the game, it really is pretty much the exact same as American Numismatist. And I haven't created an expansion for this, but all of the elements or modules of the expansion for American Numismatist could be brought into card collectors as well. So a little bit more about this exhibit hall or the exhibition center, or whatever you want to call it. So on your turn, one of the things you can do if you have the cards associated, so in your possession, and again, this is set up for a 3-player game. I didn't include, you would have a safe board just like you do in an American Numismatist, and you could have an action tracker there as well. I think I'm also missing maybe a blue player token over here. But anyway, it's basically set up for a 3-player game on the board here. And so taking a closer look at the cards, you'll notice it indicates all the same information as was on the coins in American Numismatist. The specific type overall, as well as the overall, if you will, how many actions it takes to acquire, its monetary value. And by the way, these were all, I did all the research for this stuff back when I made it, and these were, I tried to include the top 15 most valuable baseball cards, the top 15 most valuable hockey, and the top, et cetera, et cetera. So these are supposed to represent, and specifically the years, and if there's an error, like this, there really was, right? At the time that I made this game, this really was the 23rd most valuable baseball sports card. It was an error, and it was the one from 2004. So it's supposed to represent kind of realistic aspects of the industry, if you will. But all that information is represented there. And if you notice, one of the other additions then that is not included in the base game of American Numismatist is these sports collections. So it also indicates on some of the cards, the ones that I think most of them do. This one doesn't apply, right? This one would not qualify for any sports collections, but any that do will tell you how many it qualifies for and specifically the number of the collection, so you can quickly then go see it. So these different collections that you can try to submit then to the exhibition center, they are ranked in terms of their value, and then in terms also then of how many points they'll get you. And so it's telling you, for example, this Joe Doyle error card in baseball from 1909 can get you, is needed for 3 different sports collections. So the second highest ranked one, each collection has a name too, right? Error, ha ha ha. It's telling you multi-sport, and it's telling you who is ultimately required, including then that card we just pointed out. So one of the things you can do, let's say we acquired Mr. Doyle here and all those other cards at some point. Pretty hefty feat here, right? It's going to require some effort getting those specific cards. But let's say we did. One of the things we can do then on our turn is submit all of those cards to the National Sports Card Exhibition Center. And where is this? There's the information, submit special collection. And it's going to require a number of actions equivalent to however many points it's going to get you. So to submit this on my turn, I pretty much have to already have all those cards, because it's going to cost me 4 actions, because I'm going to get 4 points to submit it then. And so I would immediately, boom, increase this, right? And that might win me the game if it brings me to 10 or more. But that's basically how the special collections work. Again, it's something you can do on your turn. You would put all the relevant, right, or corresponding cards, and you put them on display. And there are special rules. Then let's say that there's 2 different... So the next person to do that on their turn would submit them here. But then from that point forward, there's already 2 collections on display. Players from that point forward can then displace one of them. Okay, so when replacing another collection, the new collection must be worth at least 1 more credibility point than one of the pre-existing collections. And provided that's the case, then you would replace the one that's worth the least. Or if they're tied, you would pick which one you wanted. So that's the way then, so whoever had those on display is going to lose those points. They'll get the cards back, right? But they'll lose whatever points was associated. Let's say somebody with collection rank 1, right? Somehow, and I mean, it wouldn't actually be possible to displace number 2, right? They'd have to displace the lower ranked one that was up there. But let's say, right, they displaced us, okay, and that was a lower ranked one. Then we would lose whatever points was associated with. Let's say it was 2. We would lose those points, okay, and whoever then displaced us would gain whatever theirs was worth. So that can, create some changes in the game dynamics for sure. And that is one of the modules, so something very similar then is one of the modules in the expansion for American Numismatists as well. But it's sort of part of the base game in card collectors. But then otherwise, pretty much everything else is the same, and like I said, all the modules in the American Numismatist expansion could be eventually incorporated into this game. And I guess I wanted to kind of wrap up my discussion of both these games by speaking to kind of their allure. I think, why I think they have so much potential. And someday I think I could see both of these games being published. And that's, if you think about how many of us out there, I know this certainly applies to me, at some point enjoyed collecting sports cards, okay? A lot of us. Now the catch is, right, I think that's Honus Wagner. I think that's the most valuable card in the game. Again, it's been a while since I made this, but somewhere out there is the Honus Wagner, I believe, #1 most valuable card. How many of us can actually afford to get these cards? Right, look how much some of them cost, right? How realistic is it? Not really. And so for those of us who, grew up collecting cards or are still into it, this is kind of it reveals kind of it provides kind of an escape and a way to, maybe not really, right, but a way to collect these super valuable cards that we know so much about, yet in reality won't ever be able to, in fact, collect, right? It kind of gives us that feeling of actually collecting those for a while, or at least seeking to and trying to. And so I think there's a lot of appeal in terms of that. And so I could see, for example, those coin shows I've referenced, that I grew up going to, just having, especially in a little box, right, American Numismatists, setting it up there, and I could see, all those collectors who, again, couldn't afford the actual most valuable quarter in real life. I could see them enjoying playing that game where they could, at least during the duration of that game, right, actually
they could collect that coin or these sports cards. So I think, again, I wanted to just mention that, and that always stood out to me, the potential of both of these, and sort of how it lets us, granted it's kind of an escape and not really happening, right? But it gives us the feel of actually collecting these rare cards or rare coins that we never otherwise could. So, all right, I think that's all I have to say about American Numismatists and card collectors, and more generally my experience submitting American Numismatists to the 2010 Rio Grande Games Design Contest. So in the next part, we'll move on to, in part 6, a discussion of, or I should say part 7, a discussion of my experience with a publisher who showed interest in some of my games. So I'll go on to discuss that now.